Proving triangle congruence. After watching this video, I will be able to prove two triangles congruent. First, we need to recall a few pieces of information. Two triangles are congruent if all 6 parts of the triangle are congruent to the other. Now, when I say 6 parts, I'm talking about the 3 sides of each triangle along with the 3 angles in the triangle. But then we saw that there were actually less information needed in order to prove two triangles congruent. So we have 4 theorems in front of us. We have the side theorem, which basically says all 3 sides must be congruent, then the 2 triangles are congruent. Then we have side angle side, where the angle is in between the 2 sides and they are congruent to each other. We have angle side angle, where the side is in between the 2 angles and they are congruent. And then we have angle side, which means that the side given is not in between the 2 angles. If we can prove that information, then the triangles are congruent. We also had a special theorem that only works for right triangles. And that's if the hypotenuse is congruent along with one of the legs. So remember, the hypotenuse is that side of a triangle that's right across the angle. And it's also the longest side. So using this knowledge and all the knowledge we have learned previously, we can use it to complete a proof. So we have to go back to that reasons for proofs document and we have to recall a lot of the information. So remember, the very first reason of a proof is given. So BD bisects AC and then BD is perpendicular to AC. Notice that this came from the given information. So my reason for the first statement is given. Next, we want to look at our statement and see if we can figure out what it means based on our diagram. So we are given AD is congruent to CD. So AD is congruent to CD, and it told me that BD is bisects AC. So when something bisects, it cuts something in half. So because of this theorem, we can come up with a statement that AD is congruent to CD. So that is the definition of segment bisector. And then we are told ADB. So we are told ADB and CDB are right angles. Well, that comes from the information telling me that BD is perpendicular to AC. When something is perpendicular, it means that the angles formed are right angles. So because of that second statement, we can say our third statement, and that would be the definition of perpendicular. So now we're saying that ADB is congruent to CDB. Well, these are exactly the same thing, but now instead of saying they're right angles, we're saying they're congruent. Well, if the 2 shapes are right angles, then they are congruent to each other because of right angles congruent theorem. And now we have BD is congruent to BD. Well, that's saying something is congruent to itself. And when something is congruent to itself, that's the reflexive property. Our last statement is saying that the 3 triangles are congruent. So we have to look at our picture and decide what type of information is given. So as my information was given to me, I marked up my picture because I needed to identify the information visually. So now I can see that I have a side congruent to another side. So I have an S. I have an angle congruent to another angle. Then I have a second side congruent to a side. And then my angle is in between the two shapes given. So I have said that the three pieces of information necessary, side, angle, side, are congruent. So the triangles have to be congruent. Here is a second example. Now, when you're doing these assignments, you also want to remember that you're going to go into your reasons for proofs document that will be attached to your independent practice, and you would want to look up what the information means. In your independent practice, you're going to have a list of choices to choose from, so you could look at the reason and look up what it means to identify whether that would be a reason that would fit the appropriate statement. So the first one is X is the midpoint of VZ and angle V is congruent to Z. That came from given information. Then I'm saying VX is congruent to XZ. Well, if something is the midpoint cuts something in half. So I'm saying VX is congruent to XZ. So that's going to be the definition of midpoint. And I'm already told, based on our given information, that angle V is congruent to angle Z. So now our next statement is angle VXW. So VXW is congruent to angle ZXY. Now, looking at the images, those are two lines that cross to form that X. So that means vertical angles are created. So the reason this statement is true is because that's the definition of vertical angles. So now I'm going to see, because I have a statement saying that the two triangles are congruent, it has to be one of those theorems that proves triangles congruent, either side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side. So I'm going to look at what my information is. So I have an angle, I have a side, and I have an angle in between. So I have angle, side, angle. Now I have to make sure I have the same in the other triangle. I have angle, side, angle. The side is in between the two angles on both triangles. So the reason this is true is because of angle, side, angle. Now, once you have proven that two triangles are congruent, you could say any part of the triangle is congruent to any of its corresponding part, because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So that's that CPCTC that we learned a while back.